Hey folks, it's Marvin Cash, the host of The Articulate Fly. On this episode, I'm joined by Chase Smith, the fly designer behind the Spiral Spook. Chase and I take a deep dive into his design philosophy and process, the evolution of the Spiral Spook, upcoming creations, and much more. But before we get to the interview, just a couple of housekeeping items. If you like the podcast, please tell a friend, and please subscribe and leave us a rating and review in the podcatcher of your choice. It really helps us out. And a shout out to our sponsor, Trout Routes. I've known Zach and the team at Trout Routes almost before Zach had a team at Trout Routes. We all know streams are getting crowded, and chances are you're not the only one at your local access point. Get away from the crowds and busy gravel lots by using Trout Routes Pro with over 350,000 access points mapped across 50,000 trout streams and much more. Trout Routes has all the data you need to help you find angling opportunities that others will overlook. Up your game and download the app today. Use code ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, for 20% off of your Trout Routes Pro membership at maps.troutroutes.com. Now, on to our interview. Well, Chase, welcome to The Articulate Fly.
Thanks for having me on, Marvin. I'm excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it, and we have a tradition on The Articulate Fly. We like to ask all of our guests to share their earliest fishing memory.
Yeah, let me think. Honestly, whenever someone asks me about the first time fishing, I usually think about going with my granddad out to Lake Amistad in Texas, and we went to Walmart and bought combos before we went out there. So I was probably 12 or 13 at the time, but that was like the first big, we're going fishing and we're going to go catch bass. And it was really fun, and we snapped our rods and everything, but that was when I got hooked.
Very, very neat. So when did you come to the dark side of fly fishing?
I didn't start fly fishing until I was my senior year of college. So I spent a long time just conventional bass fishing, some saltwater stuff, some I like to do shark lines at the beach, paddle out lines really far and stake them out. We did that a little bit, but mostly just conventional bass fishing until my senior year of college.
Got it. And so who are some of the folks that have mentored you on your fly fishing journey?
Honestly, a lot of it has been just me and a couple of my friends who got into fly fishing before or around the same time as me. And we just kind of figured it out on our own for the most part. Of course, we, looked stuff up online, and there was one local fly shop with a few people who helped us out, but most of it was just me and my buddies getting on the water.
Yeah, it's interesting. I used to live in Dallas, and I don't really think of Texas, particularly like back when I was there, like really having very many fly shops at all.
Yeah, there's a few really good ones. Living Waters is my favorite, but it's over in Austin. I'm in Kerrville, so I'm an hour away from San Antonio and a couple hours away from Austin. And there's an Orvis store in San Antonio. There's a tiny little fly shop that an older gentleman runs in Fredericksburg, about 20 minutes away from me, and we've stopped in there a couple times, but for the most part, there's not much in this area in terms of the fly fishing world. So you kind of have to travel a little bit before you get over to Austin and Houston, Dallas, where you get more people that are into it.
Yeah, got it. Yeah, it's interesting. I spent some time in the hill country when I lived in Dallas, down around kind of Green and San Marcos.
Yeah. On the Guadalupe down there.
Yeah, I didn't fish, but went and, drank Lone Star beer and went to the dance halls and all that kind of good stuff.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah. We started fishing on the Guadalupe down there where they stock the trout, but we would go try to catch the striped bass that are eating the trout. So some people don't like them, but that's the only way we fish down there.
Yeah. That's funny that we have that problem on the Watauga and the South Holston too.
Of the striped bass eating the trout?
Yep.
Yeah. It's a good problem to have, I think.
So when did you get interested in fly tying?
So I've always been I really like to do arts and woodworking stuff like that. Growing up, I used to. And in fact, for one of my birthdays when I was like 8 or 9, we invited like 30 or 40 kids over to my house, and I had built like medieval weapons out of popsicle sticks and duct tape for everybody. And we just had a melee battle of like 30, 10, 11-year-olds just hacking at each other with all this stuff. So I've always liked building things and making stuff. And so as soon as I got introduced to fly fishing, I knew I wanted to start tying flies. So I probably had a vise within 3 or 4 months after I started fly fishing.
Yeah. Do you remember what was the first vise you had and what fly you tied on it?
The first vise I had was something really cheap, probably off of eBay. The first real vise I had was a Stonfo Cayman. It's kind of like a Regal where it just has the clamp. But it didn't hold shanks very well. So I upgraded pretty quickly, but I had that one for a good little while. And, trying to think what the first fly I tied. It wasn't a woolly bugger. I know a Game Changer is one of the first things I tied. It was real crappy, but I was real excited about it.
Yeah. And what do you tie on today?
I have a Renzetti Master now.
Got it. And I bet you have shank jaws on it.
I actually don't. I just have the regular jaws, and they work great for me. I'm sure the shank jaws are awesome, but no, I don't have them.
Yeah. And so, who are some of the folks that you kind of pay attention to and have kind of influenced you as you developed as a tyer?
Well, obviously, Blaine's probably the one biggest influence because when I first started fly fishing, one of my friends around here that I fly fish with is a doctor. He's a bit older than me, and he sent me a video and was like, "Chase, if you get a chance, look at this. I think you would really like this fly." And it was a video of one of the older Game Changers I think that Blaine had put out, but I saw that and immediately I was ordering all the materials I needed to try to tie that up. And I tied up the first one and gave it to my friend for him to fish with. And so that's probably the first thing that I looked it up and tied it. I used to just go on YouTube, and it was more if I saw a pattern that I liked that someone was fishing with, then I would look it up rather than, following specific people per se. But I pretty quickly, I just kind of started doing my own thing for a lot of them. But definitely Blaine, Clouser minnows. I used to tie a lot of Clouser minnows at first. So I really liked Bob's design on that. And there's a few guys I follow now. You can kind of sift through all the chaff on Instagram and find a few guys who are really doing some cool stuff. So there's a few guys that I like to watch because they come out with unique stuff. But I also, I really try not to spend too much time looking at other people's stuff so that I don't just subconsciously start trying to imitate other people and doing stuff, especially now that I'm licensing patterns and coming up with stuff on my own. I like to, as much as I can, I like to try to be thinking and ruminating on things in my own mind and not taking in other people's stuff and then condensing that all into something different.
Yeah, you're not taking a fly and putting a different color hotspot on it and calling it something different.
Yeah, as much as you can. I try not to do that. I think, to a certain point, everything's, there's a lot of things that you might come up with something and it's already been done and you might not know it, or, you think making one little change, it warrants something like that. I think there's a way to, find a good balance of when a fly gets a new name versus, such with a hotspot, like you say.
Yeah. And so, when did you decide to jump in the deep end of the swimming pool and start production fly tying?
It was actually fairly quickly, and it wasn't really on purpose. I was a senior in college. I still wasn't sure what I was going to do coming out of college. So I had stuff on my personal Instagram and realized that all I was doing was posting fishing pictures, and all these people I didn't know would be getting on my personal Instagram and messaging me. So I started a separate Instagram page for tying, and pretty quickly just had a bunch of people wanting to order them. So I decided I'd try to make it official and get, start paying excise taxes. And Orvis store nearby had seen my stuff and started wanting to make wholesale orders. So that's kind of when I had to, really kind of make it official.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that about the excise taxes, because I think a lot of people, don't realize that, don't realize that's a thing. And then also what a pain in the behind it can be, right?
Oh yeah, it's a hassle. It's a hassle to set up. It's annoying to have to pay, a straight 10 off the top kind of, tax on everything flies. Flies are already low margin as it is, especially when you calculate the time involved. And then you try to build that into your pricing, and people don't like that, it adds more expenses to it. And there's no good way to say, hey, this fly is such and such, but I got to add an extra 10% because of this tax. You can't really do that. So you kind of just end up eating that cost.
Yeah. And so, what were some of the big surprises or adjustments you had to make when you kind of went from tying for yourself to kind of scaling up your production tying business?
It's probably a balance of what can you spend your time on that's worth it, and how do you separate yourself from everybody else who's, there's a very low barrier to entry. All you need to do is get some hooks and a vise and materials, and it's all fairly cheap, and you can start selling flies. And lots of people that, don't have a business set up or any sort of LLC, nothing like that, can just start selling flies for cheaper than you can. And it's not sustainable, but they're just doing it for fun. And they're in the same space as you. And so it's hard to scale properly and keep your margins to where they need to be to make it profitable, and sell the volume and not spend more time than it's worth tying them. It's very difficult to find something that's actually profitable within the fly tying space, going to the bigger companies and stuff like that. If you're just doing it yourself, it's hard to be long-term profitable in that way.
Yeah. And I would also say, some of these bigger patterns, they're just so involved. It's kind of hard to scale it, right?
Absolutely. Well, I don't sell game changers anymore, but when I did, the most I could tie in a day was maybe 8 to 10, something like that. Cause I'm making all the brushes, making all the shanks, doing it handmade. And then you're selling the fly for $20, and, minus your material costs, all the time it takes putting into it, then the excise tax on top of that. Plus, if you want to even consider selling them wholesale, that's 40 to 50% off the top right there. And it's just, you're looking at minimum wage or something like that at that point.
Yeah. Any other challenges kind of jump out to you, kind of, being a production tyer?
Yes. So when you're trying to, production tie, and you're having to use so much materials and you're having to tie so many flies, you're dealing not only with the monotony, but a lot of people think you got to use materials from a fly shop that are specific to fly tying. But the reality is the industry is so small. Lots of the fly tying materials are repurposed materials from other industries. And so if you look around, you can find, I use wig hair for a lot of stuff because it's very similar to some of the stiffer synthetic fibers that you can find from fly tying companies. And it probably is just the same stuff being repackaged. But it's handy to be able to go off script and find bulk materials that are not specifically branded fly tying, but that do the same thing.
Yeah, it's also too, it's like, it's also a good idea for folks to go to Hobby Lobbies and, Michael's and places like that for exactly that reason, because you can find some pretty cool stuff to tie with there.
Absolutely. I have spent way too much money at those stores.
So what attracted you to tying, I guess what I would generally call predator flies? Is it just, that's what you like to fish for, or is there something else that kind of drew you in?
I mean, I think it would just mostly stem from that's what I like to fish for. Because so if you go look on my website, the flies that I tie are carp flies, redfish flies, saltwater predatory species, and bass flies. And so obviously you can use that kind of stuff for pike, muskie, all sorts of other species, but I tie for what I fish for because I can't go test my flies on other species because they're not here. I have to design for what I can fish for typically. So that's what I do. And yeah, bass are mostly what I'm fishing for. So a lot of my time is spent trying to come up with bass flies.
Got it. And, I think you're probably best known for your Spiral Spook pattern. I was kind of wondering if you could let us know a little bit about, where the idea for the pattern came from and kind of how you developed it.
Yeah, when I was conventional fishing, my favorite way to catch fish was to throw a 4 or 5 inch bone spook and catch bass on topwater that way. And it's just, there's nothing quite like it. Being able to move the bait so much in such a short space. So you're not, ripping the lure away from the fish, but you can really work it in one spot and seeing the lure go side to side. There's a lot to it that I really enjoy. And so, there's really cool deer hair spooks that people tie, and some of them are just gorgeous works of art. But, I don't do a ton of deer hair work. I've tied some of those, but, it takes a long time, and they can absorb water and get heavy and all the, there's a host of reasons to fish them, and there's a host of reasons not to. And I just wanted to find something that was more in my wheelhouse. And I really like to use foam and synthetics and a lot of the newer style of fly tying stuff. And so I also didn't want to just stick foam on a lathe or something like that. I wanted to actually tie up a fly that could walk the dog like that and replicate that side to side motion. And so the very first time I thought about, having weights inside of a foam wrapped body, and I tried something and tied it up, and it seemed to work okay. And I knew I had something that I could work with from that point. It wanted to go side to side, and I knew I could just play with the weights and the sizes and the thickness and all the different things that go into it and make it work. So, I've been still messing with the design of that fly 3-4 years later now.
Yeah, and interesting. And so are you imparting the action on the Spiral Spook the same way you would, impart the action with a conventional bait, or did you adapt it for fly fishing?
That's a good question. With a conventional bait, you're using the rod tip, you're having to pop it, you got to let slack come into the line. And you do use some of the same concepts when you're fishing these spooks, but they're so light compared to their conventional counterparts that you do have to fish them differently. The first ones that I made, you had to strip them fast to get them to walk. It's kind of how I weighted them was, if you get a good cadence going, you could get them to walk side to side. But I realized pretty quickly that not everyone can strip really fast or keep the tempo just right. And if you couldn't do that, then it wouldn't walk. And so people would get frustrated. So one of the solutions to that is to add more weight to kind of help keep it going side to side, but then they get heavy to cast. So I ended up kind of realizing that the fly doesn't have nearly as much inertia as a conventional spook does. So you can't just weight the fly in one spot like a conventional spook. You have to distribute the weight throughout the fly, and it's all wrapped under that outer foam wrap, but it has to be very, very precise to get it to go side to side. So now I have it where you keep your rod tip in the water, pointed at the fly. You don't move the rod tip at all, and you do a slow, deliberate, but sharp strip. Just maybe 3 or 4 inches of line with a very sharp stop, but you can do it smooth and slow, and that gets it walking side to side with a lot more glide than I used to have it. It used to kind of chop side to side if you moved it fast. Now it glides more, and it's a lot easier to walk, and it's a lot easier for people that aren't as skilled at stripping fast to be able to make it work.
Yeah, very, very neat. And, it's always interesting because I always find that kind of, almost every predator fly guy I've talked to, they have a deep conventional angling background, and they just decided that they wanted to kind of apply that knowledge in the fly fishing space. What are some other things that your conventional angling background's brought to your fly designs?
Yeah, so I think most of what I brought, coming from a conventional background, I wasn't super serious on the conventional side of things. I did it for fun fairly often, but just the movements that trigger bass, especially, were some of the things that I still try to replicate with my flies. Whether it's, right now I've been messing around with some glide bait style flies that I still haven't perfected, but I love seeing a glide bait chop side to side, and that's something I want to do with a fly. And the spook, obviously, I've got a frog that's really, really cool that actually Blaine's going to be producing through his Chocklett factory, and that'll hopefully be here this next spring. But just replicating the style of what I used to enjoy throwing on conventional bait, I still do that with a fly rod. Because the reason I use a fly rod is I enjoy the casting so much. I enjoy being able to make my own flies. I enjoy the light presentation of the flies. Just everything about that is kind of what draws me to fly fishing. And I don't feel the need to throw any conventional anymore, just because I have more fun not catching fish fly fishing than I do if I were catching fish conventional. And so that's kind of my baseline. And fortunately, fly fishing, you usually do catch fish. And one of the best parts is you can see any fish, any fish in the river that you see, typically there's a fly that it's going to eat. So that's the other, side of that coin is when I was conventional fishing, I would never catch a carp or, some of these cichlids or other things that are in the river. You don't catch those on the things that you're throwing for bass. So now I usually keep 3 rods, top water, streamer, and then a carp or panfish style rod. And any fish I come across in our rivers, I can make a decent presentation to that has a chance of catching them.
Got it. And, it's interesting too, because your patterns are, stylistically different, but I was wondering if there's maybe, like a unifying design philosophy that you have when you're trying to create new patterns.
Probably the one thing I keep coming back to is trying to make weedless designs, or at least snagless, because I get really frustrated throwing any fly that's hook point down. And I also don't enjoy throwing jig flies all that much. So I really like to try to get level sinking flies that are hook point up, whether it's a game changer that has a little bit of foam in it in certain places, or some of the glide style flies that I have. The spook sits hook point up. The frogs that I've been designing are weedless. So I really like being able to throw flies back into the junk and into the thick stuff where the bass, typically are, and not get snagged. So even on my carp flies, they all sit hook point up. And that's probably a pretty unifying thing that I use.
Got it. And, where do you get your ideas for your new patterns, and kind of like, how do you like to kind of go from kind of concept to finished fly?
Most of the time I start from being on the water and seeing either like a localized event where I see bass feeding on a certain bait fish, or something acting a certain way and wanting to replicate that movement, or just a bait fish in general, or for example the frog. It's just wanting to replicate the kicking motion of a frog. So on the fly that I've designed, the legs, when you strip it forward, the legs kick backwards and then retract, and it looks like a frog swimming. But it took forever to figure out how to make that happen, because it's a very unique motion in, like the design world, to have, frog legs that kind of stay in place as you strip forward and then can spring back. It was very difficult, but I enjoy that aspect of it. I like to try to have something slightly unique as kind of a selling point in each fly, to make it worth, designing a new fly around something.
Got it. And I always like to ask, really serious tires to share 3 tips for us mere mortals that will kind of help us up our game at the bench, right?
Yeah, I can. Some of probably the biggest thing that has helped me is not being limited to materials in recipes, and more understanding the inherent qualities of each material. So being able to see a specific fiber and know that it's stiff or going to absorb water or whatever it is, and it doesn't have to be exactly what a certain fly pattern calls for. But if you have something that's going to perform the same, typically you can sub it out and it's going to be just fine. And honestly, fish are not nearly as picky as we like to think they are, for the most part, especially in the streamer world. And you can get away with some changes that may not be exactly what the original recipe calls for, but it'll work out just fine. So I found that I tied up when I was first starting to, tie. I found that I had a lot more fun when I started straying from designs and from the recipes, and using new things and trying things out, and not being afraid to do that, because you don't have to stick to exactly what's being called for. The second thing is something that I tell everybody whenever they come to any of my shows, and I'm tying up, especially if I'm tying up game changers and I'm using, certain tools. But if you're going to mess with wire, dubbing brushes, anything like that, buy a pair of orthodontics pliers, orthodontic snips. And they are the best tool for $10 that you'll ever get. I've tied thousands of game changers with the same stainless steel orthodontics snips, and they're better than the flush wire cutters you can get at hardware stores, anything like that. They're probably my favorite tool that I found that doesn't come from a fly shop.
Got it. And how about number 3?
Let me think. The last one that I really use a lot is learning to make your own shanks. It just is so helpful to be able to measure out to the millimeter how big I want a shank to be, and then make it myself. So whether you're buying a wire bending jig, or getting there's a one-step looper tool, and you can bend stainless steel wire yourself. That's probably another of the biggest things that I use all the time.
Got it. And I always like to ask, serious tires. The other one is everybody's got some kind of squirrely tool that may not even kind of officially be a tool that they can't live without. Do you have anything like that?
Probably those orthodontics pliers are up there. I use those all the time, and I have multiple pairs in case I ever lose them. Let me think. I don't use too many. I don't use a lot of tools, honestly. Probably those one-step looper, the wire benders, I use those a lot. So that's probably the one. If it broke, I would have to order a new one that same day.
Got it. And are there any projects you're working on you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yeah, I've got several patterns coming out with Montana Fly Company that I'm excited about. We've been working on those for a long time, and they'll be hopefully here pretty soon and finalized and everything. So I'm excited about that. I'm really excited to be working with Blaine with the Chocolate Factory stuff. I've stopped selling Game Changers because he's finally selling them himself, and he's the original designer. So I strongly believe that he should be getting royalties uh, from that pattern. And so it's unfortunate to see all these other companies selling Game Changers, but no royalties going to him. So any way I can push people towards that, I do. But I'm super excited that he's going to be making one of my flies with that frog. So hopefully that'll be this next year, and that'll be really cool. Other than that, I've got a new hook that I'm putting on the Spiral Spook that has made the hookup ratio probably 5 or 6 times better. Because I spent a lot of time, watching bass eat it and seeing why they didn't get hooked. And so I've made a switch on that, and I'm finally finishing up rebalancing uh, all the different sizes of the spooks and getting the new hook sourced and everything like that. And they'll be way better. So pretty soon I'll be back in production on those.
Got it. And is that a hook that's going to be available to everybody else, or is that just something just for you?
Oh, it's already a hook that's out there. It's a Gamakatsu finesse wide gap hook. It just has an upturn point that works way better than the one that I had. The other hook is an Arex hook, and it's great, just not for this application. So switching to that other hook has made a huge difference.
Got it. And so if folks want to check out your flies and purchase a few, where should they go?
Yeah, they can go to my website, www.fishchaseflies.com. And they can also go to my Instagram, which is fishchaseflies. And that's typically all my stuff is either on my website or coming out on my Instagram. There's quite a few fly shops that have the scoops, and pretty soon there will be a lot more once I get back into the swing of producing them again.
Got it. Because I know I know your favorite fly shop in Austin has them for sure, right?
Oh yes, yeah, they've got a bunch of them.
Yeah. And so, is there anything else you'd like to share with our listeners before I let you go this evening?
I can't think of much off the top of my head. Just I'm always trying to get out there and film, and hopefully pretty soon I'll have a bunch of topwater stuff for that frog and spook. And I've been trying not to put as much on Instagram lately, just because I've been redesigning the spook with a new hook and everything. And so pretty soon I've been taking a bunch of footage, and you can see it all on my Instagram once I get it all put out there, but that'll all start ramping back up pretty soon.
Got it. And if folks want to find you on the show circuit in 2025, you got any shows on the calendar?
I'll always be at Trout Fest here in Texas. They do that one over on the Guadalupe by Green and all those other places. It's an awesome show. I'll also be at there's a couple other local Texas shows that I'll do. I'm not sure if I'm going back up to the Schultz Outfitters Bob in the Hood, but I hope so. Other than that, I don't have anything quite planned. I've still got 2 little kids at home, so a lot of my time is pretty limited.
Yeah, no, fair enough. We were talking about that. It's interesting. Mine are 22 and 16, and just different challenges, I guess, is the easiest way to say it.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. And so if folks want to follow your adventures at the Vice or on the water, where should they go?
Following my Instagram is the best way. Fish Chase Flies on Instagram. That's where I post everything and put all my videos. And I do have a bunch on YouTube of tutorials and stuff like that. So I'm pretty sure it's just Fish Chase Flies on YouTube as well. But those would be the two places to see pictures and videos. And then you can actually buy the flies on my website.
Yeah, got it. And I'll drop all that stuff in the show notes for you.
Awesome.
Yeah. Well, listen, Chase, I appreciate you spending some time with me this evening. It's been a lot of fun.
Of course. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Have a great one.
You too.
Well, folks, we hope you enjoyed the interview as much as we enjoyed bringing it to you. Don't forget to check out Trout Routes Pro at maps.troutroutes.com. Use ARTFLY20, ARTFLY20, all one word, to get 20% off of your membership. Tight lines, everybody.